Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight we are on episode 295. And it's that time of year when the temperatures are dropping and the old white stuff starting to powder down on us. Or at least here in East Coast Canada, we had our first, I don't want to say significant snowfall. We just had our actual first snowfall. It was just enough to make ground white, but it did get me a thinking. And that's kind of what brought on the topic here tonight. And when I approached Ben about it, this is something we both think about around this time of year. So we figured we'd just have a general discussion on it. So with snow, if you plan on traveling in the woods and stuff like that, it does bring its own unique challenges and advantages. And we have talked about this in the past. And I don't think we've done a complete episode on it, but we have definitely highlighted it in different episodes. So I figured we'd actually straight up highlight it this time. Traveling around in snowy conditions, or winter, or snow, or whatever you want to call it, in all honesty.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go with that. Yeah. So, the first thing I got to throw out, because there's nothing that I like more. And there may be a few things. Not much I like more than the freshly fallen snow on the trees. When you head out, and you see that nice snow sitting on the trees, it's absolutely gorgeous. So, it is one of my favorite times to get out there and do something. So, why are you going out there? Some people might say, why are you going out in the snow? Why aren't you just staying inside where it's warm and comfortable? The reality is it's absolutely gorgeous. Everything looks different. Everything feels different. Everything sounds different once everything's covered in snow.
Yeah, and that was one of the points I was going to bring up later, but definitely. It is absolutely serene, and I'm very much with you. There's a specific kind. If you get the larger flakes that are still kind of ice crystals, and that way just as the sun's coming up, everything glistens. I know, very storybook here, but it is true. There's a reason storybooks use them. It's absolutely magnificent.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's what I think of when I think of snow. But I also realize there's a hell of a lot of people that see snow and they have pure panic. And I've seen that where people are worried because cars can slide off the road. People have slipped in snow. One thing is if you have a decent amount of snow, when you fall, it doesn't hurt nearly as much.
But playing devil's advocate on that one, much which I think we're going to do here tonight, banter back and forth, is the snow hides a lot of things that you may have seen and not tripped over in the first place.
And that doesn't mean you're going to hit the snow when you fall. And the first year I was up here, we went, I tried to run across a road. I jumped over a snowbank. When I hit the snowbank, my 2 feet stuck in the snowbank and my body went down and I hit the pavement and I busted my face up pretty good. So, yeah, there is risk. There's definitely risk in the snow. It's much harder to walk through snow. It's more hard to drive through snow. And I think we're going to cover probably both, like driving or moving a vehicle in snow as well as just personal travel,
Oh, absolutely. I think a lot of what we talk about will actually cover both avenues. I'm hoping this goes fluid tonight. In my head, this was a very fluid conversation, so hopefully we hold close to that. But yeah, snow in general. There's a lot of good, there's some bad, there's a lot to keep in mind. And there's definitely a lot of good things. And I guess let's get that out of the way first, because like you said, there are some people out there that are absolutely terrified of snow. And I'm not picking on our brethren from the south, but one of the running gags is, in states and stuff like that, and other places that don't necessarily have snow, an inch of snow there could shut down a city, where an inch of snow here is just what we got before breakfast. You know what I mean? Yeah. There is a perspective, what's the word I'm looking for? A perspective element to this whole situation as well.
Yeah, there definitely is. And preparedness. And I think that's a huge thing with snow. If you're going to travel in snow, if you're going to go into snow, being prepared and being educated makes a huge difference. And so people who grew up in the snow, we take it for granted. We understand that we drive differently in the snow, that when you walk in snow, you walk differently. You control how your body reacts to it, because you know that sudden movements on icy and snowy conditions tend to continue with it or without your permission. So, you try to step down instead of step forward, because that's going to, when you hit your brakes, you're gentle on it. When you hit your throttle, you're gentle on it, because you can easily go from a nice controlled movement to a very uncontrolled slide in both conditions. And I just thought about it, like stuff like this, like the traction cleats on your boots, that makes a huge difference. But generally, being properly dressed and prepared is very important. So a good pair of boots, obviously warm clothes, and things that are somewhat waterproof, because snow tends to stick to things, it tends to melt. And if it's not a waterproof or water resistant, it'll absorb in and freeze, and then it'll steal any heat retaining capabilities that item could have probably handled. So, proper clothing that can handle the weather is vitally important. Same thing with your vehicle. If you have all seasons or summer tires on your car and you're trying to do a lot of stuff in snow, chances are you're going to find you do not have the traction to either get going or stop or turn when you need to.
No, 100%. And one little thing I want to throw in here, just before we gloss over it, because I know it's a big thing. A lot of people are waiting for us to say it. So let's say the elephant in the room saying, and then we'll move on, because that's not what this episode is about. But in cold weather, mind sweating, getting damp, moisture in general. This is our disclaimer, as always. Try to bundle up in layers and always stay at a comfortable temperature. You know the old saying, if you sweat, you die? There was a classic guy that coined that term, and it is true. Keep that in mind in any cold weather. If you sweat, you're going to lose heat as you cool down. It's going to pull it away from you with evaporation, and you're going to freeze. So keep that in mind. That's all we're going to mention off it for this episode, because we have talked about that at great length in several podcasts. Not the time for it this time, but definitely something to keep in mind. So jumping back on there, it's definitely the right gear for the right environment. As snow comes in, we tend to put on more clothing. And on that note, you mentioned it a little bit already, is traveling in snow tends to take a lot more energy than when you're not traveling in snow. And it's not simply just stepping through the snow. It's you're carrying extra weight. You're in more confined clothing. You're bundled up more. You have to move slower so you don't sweat, or you have to be able to regulate that heat somehow. There's a lot more thought, as Ben was saying, going into every step you take. So mentally, it's more draining. It's not just a leisurely stroll down the road anymore. It's now, okay, I'm watching where I'm stepping. As you said, you're pushing down. Oh, is that ice? Is that puddle frozen? Should I walk around it? Am I going to go through it? Am I going to get wet? My feet going to get wet? You're thinking about stuff. It is physically and mentally more exerting than walking any other time of year.
Yeah. And it's in deep snow. I mean, how many times have you ended up like stepping and going much deeper than you expected, that throwing your balance off?
Oh man, especially in the woods, getting around a softwood stand or something like that where they have the roots and the holes and dips and stuff like that, all looks fairly flat, and all of a sudden you step somewhere and you're right up to your groin in this hole, and all of a sudden you're like, well, that was completely unexpected. And if the snow had not have been there, maybe you would have noticed it was a hole, maybe you wouldn't have. It's hard to say, but it definitely does hide significant amounts of things.
Yes. And the snow can be more firm in a couple of spots and loose or hollow underneath. You don't know what it's going to look like below. A really good method, especially if you're not comfortable, is to take like a hiking stick or just a stick in general and poke where you're going, especially if you're coming across frozen water. Because frozen water may be barely frozen, partially frozen, fully frozen, but not deep. And it may be as solid as a road. So, a lake frozen solid, you can drive a car across, but a lake with only 2 or 3 inches, you probably don't even want to walk on it. You know what I mean? But a good stick, you can poke and hit it and get a feeling. And if your stick goes through, probably you should not step there.
Definitely should not be stepping there. But yeah, and once again, that comes down to the right gear. You can have the walking stick, which Ben and I are a fan of, although I think we both own a set of trekking poles as well, which also helps in the balancing thing, but you can also use it as a poking stick, as we have so generously named for this podcast. But yeah, it's definitely something that's going to help you. Not only can you poke at the ice, but also, as I said, it gives you that third leg of balance. Things are a little bit more slippy. You do have to be a little bit more mindful. You can share some of the weight of the extra gear you're carrying onto that third appendage, you know what I mean? And there's kind of a whole knack to using a walking stick and hiking poles, and I think we talked about that a little bit in the past too, and if that's something people want to hear about a little bit more, maybe we'll talk about that some other time. But it's definitely something to keep in mind. You are going to be putting in a little bit more effort, grab yourself a walking stick. A walking stick any time of the year is a good thing to have, and we preach about this all the time. But during the winter, it's almost vital in my mind.
Yeah. I don't know how many times I've, nearly stumbled, and it hadn't been for my stick or my pole, I probably would have landed much harder. Also, if I need to clear a distance, that kind of helps me control that jump and whatever. I can also check and see if where I'm about to step is going to be stable enough. And like you said, even in the summer, walking around rivers and stuff, you can poke a rock. Is that rock really solid, or is it something that's going to tip over? With ice and snow, the same thing. You can poke at it. How deep is the snow? What's underneath it? Is it wet underneath? Because, with snow, you could be walking along and it looks nice and dry. Next thing you know, you're up to your knee in puddle.
And that only takes a thin skiff of ice over top of that puddle, and then the snow to build up on that, and you would never see it. Happens all the time. We used to call them soakies. Do you remember that term, Ben? I don't know if that is that a Canadian term, East Coast term, is that a global term? I have no idea. It's a term I always knew, but I've talked about it to the younger generations, and they look at me like I got six heads. So I don't know if that's an East Coast thing, a Canada thing, North American thing, or if it's just
might be a Picto thing.
Maybe? I don't know. Anyway, a soaky is literally that. You're walking along, all of a sudden your foot disappears into something wet. And that's the best explanation you're going to get. The term came from when we used to be skating as kids. And, yourself, you get around the edge of the ice, and with all the reeds and stuff, that's generally where it gets thin. Your foot goes through, you get a soaky.
Yeah. What else?
Well, something, just to lead into this, I didn't know if you had any more follow-up on that. Something else I wanted to talk about was something we mentioned earlier. We might as well roll down there unless you come up with something better. Camping in the snow has a couple other things you have to keep in mind, too. Snow, as we mentioned, changes the sound of the environment. Snow itself is a great insulator to not only heat, but sound. If you sleep out in the woods with fresh fallen snow, it is eerily quiet, really unnervingly quiet unless you're expecting it. And I can still remember the first time that I slept in the snow, and it was so quiet I could hear my heart beating in my ears, which was really making me nervous. And I didn't know if at some point I actually damage my hearing or something, because normally I'm used to hearing the leaves rustle or an animal scurry by, or two trees rub against each other and make a squeaking noise, like some sort of sound. But if it's like that nice fresh powdery snow and it's still snowing when you're out there, you can pretty much hear nothing if there's no wind.
Yeah.
And that's not an exaggeration.
No, it's like you said, it is eerily quiet, especially at night when it's dark. There's times when it's you could forget the rest of the world exists because there's very little sign of it. We talked about the advantages, and I mean, of course, being quiet and restful is one of the huge advantages. The other thing is it does open up means of travel that might not normally be available to you. And skiing and snowshoeing is two of our favorite sports, I believe. At least
less of the skiing for me. Fat people don't ski well. Potatoes on skis just doesn't look good.
As cross-country skis, I do enjoy. I haven't done it as much lately. Snowshoes are absolutely great. But sometimes areas that you normally couldn't easily walk or couldn't safely walk because of the terrain and everything else, sometimes it's much more doable in the snow. And if you think about that, like people who are into snowmobiles, they can go places that you would never make it in a four-wheeler in the summer, because a four-wheeler just can't go across those bogs and thick woods and stuff. But in the winter, when the snow is right, you can travel over a lot of that terrain and into places where it's too rooty, too rocky, but with enough buildup of snow, you can just sort of glide over the top of everything. So it does allow you to get to places you normally couldn't get and see things that you normally wouldn't get to see.
And I would just add on to that and bring supplies you may not otherwise be able to bring. And I think maybe you were heading in this direction, along with that extra mode of transportation, snowshoes and stuff like that. You have the ability, if you're lucky, to pull a sled behind you. If you've picked up a sled, you can carry a lot of gear in a sled and offset the weight by pulling it, and end up actually taking more gear with you. Sometimes at a necessity, you know what I mean? But in other terms, you can take some stuff you normally don't take. You can take some niceties, you can take some luxuries, you can take some experimental stuff if you want to play while you're out in the woods. It just does open up another unique experience to you. And I know you've had some experience with this. I have a sled now, but I've yet to actually get it in the woods.
Yeah, so I've had a couple of sleds. The newest one is the first proper Polk sled. The other ones I used were kid sleds that I just modified for this. The old Noma style sleds. And I mean, they're great. And it does, you know, you can take your hot tank, you can take your hammock with a good underquilt or multiple underquilts and layer them and get it in places that you might not. Also, your clothing. You need a lot more clothing when you're in the winter. But as you mentioned before, you don't want to sweat. So oftentimes what I find is you take the clothing, but then during the harder parts of the day, you shed that clothing. You need a place to put that. So you can bundle that all up, put it in a compression sack or something, and then just stuff that into that Polk sled, and you can walk around a bit more freedom. And the beauty is, since it's not on your back, and that's great because in the snow it's harder to walk, or you're just pulling it, is when you want to take a break and do something. It's literally just secure the sled so it doesn't slide back or down somewhere you don't want to be, but you can then just let it go. Where a pack you would have to unload and then reload. The Polk sled is much easier. Just whip that string around a branch or something so it stays put, and you can, you know, move around without that load and pick it up really quickly. The Polk sled also doubles as a few other things when you get to camp. Potentially a place to sit that keeps you off the snow, flip it upside down, maybe put it up on a small snowbank, and all of a sudden you have a table that you can be using. Like, it has its useful features. It also makes an awesome windbreak. And when collecting firewood, there's not much better than a good Polk sled and your saw. Go find some standing dead, chunk it up, put it in, drag it back to your campsite, and you're good to go. Way easier than in the summer when you're trying to drag it through the woods or carry arm loads. You can carry probably the entire night's wood in 1 or 2 trips with a good Polk sled.
Yeah, for sure. It is almost like having a second person to share the workload with during the winter. Once again, not from much experience, unfortunately, because I have yet to try it, but I definitely plan on getting it out a little bit more this winter. But I have seen it used. I have been with people that have used them. I've watched your videos on them. If anybody's interested in doing one of these sleds too, I do believe, Ben, you did a review on one a little while back. It's one of our independent videos, and I encourage people to go back there and look at it too, because Ben covers a lot of interesting topics there and talks about it quite a bit in depth on how to pack it and pull it around as well, which is not really tonight's episode. So if that is your thing, once again, highly encourage you to jump back and check out those episodes. Okay, selfless or shameless self-plug over.
One thing to keep a note with the Polk sled, going downhill, it is going to come at you. So if you have some way to a more rigid string, so and I've done this with PEX pipe, or other people have done it with ABS, and I even modified a snow scoop handle to assist with this. And what it allowed me to do was to move it without it going forward or back, and it helped me steer it and control its path a bit better than just a string. So do know if you're just using the string, you will have some struggles. But if you can make something much more stiff that you can hook to yourself, some people hook them to their belts, and they do it hands-free, which means you can still use your poles, you can still use everything else, and you don't have to worry about it hitting you in the back of the ankle, because that hurts a lot.
All right, so we talked about some of the good things. We got about 10 minutes left here. Now to throw some words of warning at you folks, and not to scare anybody, just things to actually keep in mind. So we already talked about the whole cold thing. Keep that in mind. Things are going to be more slippery. Things are going to be more quiet. And on that note, if you get unnerved in the woods at night to begin with, this is going to be a whole new experience, and prepare for it. Bring some entertainment. A harmonica, a throat harp, something. Just keep your mind off, keep you busy, and make some sound. Really goes a long way. Now, some other things. I find, and I'm not sure, maybe you can kind of enlighten me on your point of view on this too, Ben, is I find with the winter and the snow, I tend to take risks a little bit more because I'm like, oh, the snow will break my fall if something goes wrong. Which is not, and this is a lot like the kettle calling the pot black, not the best idea. In hindsight, and hindsight being 2020, I know I shouldn't. I absolutely know I shouldn't because you never know what's lurking under the snow. But if I'm like, yeah, I could probably do that if I fall. Yeah, the snow will break my fall. You know, like there's 8 inches, a foot of snow down. I'll be fine. You know, what's the worst that could happen? I have a tendency to get this mentality. Ben and I have both said in the past we tend to be a little more aggressive with what we do. We don't encourage this. We just acknowledge our own shortcomings. But it is definitely something to look out for. The snow can kind of create that false sense of security for you, as that security net to catch you. As we mentioned before, it kind of gives that nice level look to everything. Like, oh, this is going to be great going. There couldn't be anything under there that's going to hurt me. And I do have a little story on this, and I know I'm running a little long in my talk here, but I was walking along, Mel and I, and much like we said earlier, you know, you step somewhere and you sink further than you think you are. We were coming over a little snow ridge. I stepped, I fell into a hole. There was a stick or an old bush or something there that was coming up. The tree actually kind of hit my shin and right up into my knee and straight into the bone. Like, it was a real deep, nasty cut. And it was caused because literally I was just moving probably a little quicker than I should have, because that snow gave me that false sense of security, being like, oh yeah, you know what? It's a bit of a snowbank, but I can just trudge through it because it's snow. What's the worst that's going to happen? You know what I mean?
Yeah. One thing to keep in mind, I mean, that is very, very true, and I have a really good story. We followed some people in where they fell through the ice and continued. And I had serious concerns with them, and I actually ran into them after they returned and found out that one guy ended up spending the entire night in the tent trying to dry out because of that fall. And they were close to get to the start when they did this. We didn't cross the river. We camped at the safer side of the river. But a lot of people get a false sense of security in, I'll be able to just follow my tracks out. So if you're exploring a new area and it's snowy, it's going to, even if it's an area you're more familiar with, it's going to look different in the snow. And with the short amount of daytime, it doesn't take much to get yourself a little lost, a little turned around. And you're like, I'll just follow my footprints out, and that sounds awesome. Do remember, do keep in mind, a little bit of wind or a little bit of snow, and your footprints will disappear. Shockingly fast, actually. And you may also be surprised how long they'll stay in other areas. So be sure you know how to get out, because if something changes in the weather, you get some small storms or a heavy wind or a good snowfall, that path that you thought could get you out might no longer be available. Plus, if you get enough snow, the path that was passable on the way in might not be passable on the way out.
And we actually did an interview with an individual that kind of got themselves into something similar earlier in our podcasting career. And I do encourage people to go back and listen to this gentleman's story. His name was Jonathan Conti, Conti. I hope I pronounced that right. I know I asked him on the show, and I think I said it the same. But in any case, same thing. This guy is an outdoorsy kind of guy, does a lot of adventuring, traveling, stuff like that, and all the things we talked about here tonight, he kind of reiterated. He wasn't moving as fast as he thought he should have because, you know, the snow had slowed him down. He got down into a hole where he couldn't get back up out of. He was the individual that had to use the Spot SOS device and have somebody come rescue him. And that's what that whole show was on. Once again, encourage people to go, look at that, 2 plugs in one show, man. I'm on a roll here. I do recommend people go back and listen to that. It's a super good show, story from this individual, from his experiences, and I highly encourage people to learn from them so that we don't repeat the past. But yeah, that's another point, is the path you are used to seeing may look different in the snow. If it's an area that you don't know like the back of your hand, and even if it is an area like, you know, like the back of your hand, it does look significantly different when it's covered under 6 inches of snow or more. I don't like whatever the snow is for your area. I mean, here last year, what did we have? 4 feet of snow at one point? That was in one snowfall.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, over the years, we have seen some pretty impressive snowfalls that would have definitely changed an entire trip. Like, had I been out, or had you been out, the return trip would have been significantly different than the trip in.
Oh, if I had to get caught in that snowstorm from last year, and for those that don't, we use feet, but it'd be like, what, 1.3 meters? 1.3, 1.4? Not quite 1.5 meters, but somewhere in there. Anyway, it's a significant amount of snow, and this fell over a 48-hour period. There's some pictures back there. You can see how it fell. But, yeah, if I had been out in the woods, and truth be told, if I remember correctly, I think we were planning to go out and do some cabin camping or something then, and then we heard about the storm and we're like, we'll just hang back just in case. And yeah, if we had gone to the cabin, there's a very serious risk we may not have been able to get back out, period. Because nobody was coming to plow those roads where we would have been, and the roads that road led to were probably 2-3 weeks to be plowed, and that location was most likely, I'm gonna guess, 80 plus kilometers. I think that's around, and I'm doing real shady math here, folks. That's like, what, 60 miles? Something like that. Anyway, no, 60 miles would be 100 kilometers. 50 miles? Anyway, significant distance from anybody, so it's not like we could have walked out. Not to mention, it would almost be impossible to walk out in 4 feet of snow, because it was about 2 kilometers from the cabin to the main road, and then like 80 kilometers from the main road to anywhere where somebody would have found us, and those roads didn't get touched for 3 weeks, because they were trying to bail out all the other roads with people on them, you know what I mean? So there's a good chance, terrible to say, but we could have died back there if we had went on our trip. I mean, we had our cell phones. We probably could have got... No, that's the other thing. There's real limited cell phone reception back there. I'm sure we would have found some, but in the event the cell towers went down, which they did for a while, like we would have been SOL. Literally just stuck.
I mean, there's an argument for like the satellite communication that I push sometimes. It means I could call for help in that situation. But I did a trip down in Cloud Lake quite a few years ago, since we did the podcast. Me, Gary, and Lone Wolf, Jeremy, whatever you want to call it, and we took. He took his son. I took my daughter. We did 1 or 2 nights in hot tents.
Oh, I remember that adventure. Yeah, that's where you guys had the pop-up smell shack, wasn't it? Seeing how it would act.
The pop-up snow shack was there. We had 3 One Tigris systems. We had the Smoky Hut. We had the... I don't think I had my Wild Haven at the time. I think I borrowed the Smoky Hut. We had 3 different One Tigris ones, and we all slept in them. And overnight we had enough snow, probably between 12 and 18 inches. And that snow collapsed one of the tents, and that happened to be the ice shelter one. And it's because it has a relatively flat top, and that 1 foot of snow actually caused the fiberglass poles to shatter under the weight. That was a big deal. Also, the 2 vehicles we were factored with, I think Jeremy had his, I think at the time it probably would have been his Durango.
I was going to say, that was the one he had previous to this, whatever.
Yeah. And Gary had the Cherokee. I believe it was the Cherokee. And
were you in Scout?
What?
Were you in Scout?
I don't think I had taken a vehicle back. I think on that particular trip, my vehicle got left in town, and I jumped in with one of them. I think I jumped in with Gary, actually. Me and Sky did. I don't think my vehicle would have made it out at the time. I think Scout would have, but I don't think the vehicle I had at the time would have made it out. Maybe I did have the Silverado, maybe. But if it wasn't for the capable vehicles, we would not have made it in or out at the time. But I think at the time, we had the Dart. I think it was the
yeah, I was going to say, if it was before Scout, you had the Dart then. Maybe it was the Dart you had when you were going out in that adventure. I can't remember now.
Yeah, around the time I had the Dart, I had the Silverado. But I did lose that at one point. There was a period where it may have been in there. But either way, if you get stuck, like think of it, if you went back 7-8 kilometers back, dirt roads, that's not necessarily getting plowed. So your vehicle could be stuck there till the spring, unless you can afford to have a piece of heavy equipment come plow your road 5 or 6 kilometers. And that's, a snowplow company's not doing that for free.
No, absolutely not. I'm trying to remember during that, and we're kind of we went into story time here, but seeing Mel walked in during the big snowfall. Was it it was D6 and D8 dozers they used to get out on Big Island?
I don't know what dozer kinds
It was a big dozer.
Yeah.
Anyway, they had to use dozers. Like, they weren't snowplow companies. They contracted in literally heavy machinery operators, and I think they were like D6 and D8 dozers. Big, buggerly dozers to plow this road to get back there to give an individual some medication. Like, there's the chance they may not be able to make it back to you, period. Like, they tried to get helicopter in originally, nowhere to land it. Snowmobiles couldn't make it in just because of the way the snow had flowed. Not to mention this is an inlet and water was rushing over it.
It was getting dark. That was the main reason they didn't want to go with the skidoos again.
A lot of factors there. But yeah, it's still something you got to keep in the back of your mind to be safe while you're out there traveling in the winter. What is the possibility of coming back if something goes bad? What?
Dogs, what are you doing? Determined to bug Dad. Get out.
The dogs are just on their way out.
He's on a rampage. Get out.
Anyway, yeah, definitely something to keep in mind, folks. We are at our 30 minutes here tonight. We told a few stories, gave some information. Do you got any final thoughts there, Ben? Anything you want to add into the show?
No, I mean, if you're new to traveling in snow, do take some time to research it and understand the risks and rewards, and make sure that you're properly prepared. If you are used to it, tell us what works for you. We'd love to hear your ideas. I think both me and Robert have spent a fair bit of time out. We've used many vehicles, including ATVs, snowmobiles, trucks, cars, you name it. We've probably dragged it out there if we could, as well as sleds, skis, and snowshoes. And it is a great time to get out there. It is different. One of my favorite things growing up was what we call the boil up, and we did that mostly in the winter, where you went in and you boiled up a quick little meal, a cup of hot chocolate, maybe some stew or something, and it is an absolute delight to do that in the winter. And I remember those with my father and my mother to this day. And if you guys get a chance to do that, I highly recommend it. Overnighting is not for everyone, and snow shelters make awesome shelters, so give that a try too.
All right, folks, hopefully this was informative for you here tonight. If you guys have a topic that you'd like us to cover, please reach out to us. You can reach us on all forms of social media. I'm starting to realize that a lot of our buttons below our video are getting outdated now. There is no such thing as Twitter. It's now X. Google Podcasts went away ages ago. I'm just really slack. Any case, if you want to get a hold of us, you can find us. Search us on whatever search engine, Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. There's several ways to get in contact with us. Reach out to us. Let us know what, like Ben said, what's your methods? I know we're listened to clear across the globe, so somebody that's over there in those nice snowy, Switzerland, maybe even Siberia, places like that. And yes, I have seen that we have hit hits in Siberia, which really interested me. But in any case, from those places, what works, folks? Yeah, here in Canada, we get snow, but I mean, there's places that get more. You know what I mean? We are not experts on this by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think anybody is. We just learn from each other and share the information. Danny, stay safe and stay out in the hot sun. I mean, warm is nice, but I like the cooler weather because there's no bugs. But yeah, everybody has their time of year. Get out there, have fun, play safe, and let us know about it.
I heard Japan gets a shocking amount of snow, but
that's what I mean. Like, everybody... Once again, I know we almost wrapped up, but final thought. Everybody thinks, not everybody, there is a stereotype thought that Canadians live in igloos and we're in snow 90% of the time. We don't live in igloos, we're in snow about, 60% of the time? Bad snow maybe 4 months of the year, and then we'll get dustings that just never go away.
It's hard to say that for Canada. I would have to say you'd have to break it out by region.
Yeah.
Newfoundland seems to be a bit more than others. If you go up north, it's even longer. Vancouver and Halifax, probably some of the least in the country, if you ask me.
Absolutely.
Right?
I can remember times living in Halifax driving my motorcycle year round.
Yeah, so, if you know, it varies from location to location. Even within province, it varies a lot. So it's keep that in mind when you're doing this stuff. But yeah.
All right. We'll see you next week, folks, with a new topic, and hopefully